The can of peaches was way too high, and my grandson's scream shattered more than just the silence of aisle 4. I am Alice, 73 years old, and even though my hands shake, my signature still owns everything. He thinks I'm just an old piece of furniture, but he is about to find out that without me, his luxury world grinds to a dead halt. I have always liked going to the grocery store on Tuesday mornings. There are fewer people, the vegetables are fresher, and the air conditioning feels good when your bones are tired from the humidity. For 40 years, I ran my own freight and moving company. I lifted boxes, negotiated with stubborn truck drivers, and learned to spot a flat tire just by looking at it. But today, to my family, I am just Grandma Alice, the one who needs jars opened for her and walks way too slow. That morning, my daughter Betty could not take me. She had her yoga class, or one of those modern things she does to find herself with the money I earned sweating through oil and grease. So, she asked Ethan, my 22-year-old grandson, to do me the favor. "Oh, Mom, seriously?" I heard him huff from the kitchen while I was putting on my orthopedic shoes. "I have things to do. I am meeting up with the guys." "It is only an hour, Ethan. Besides, you are taking Grandma's SUV. Take advantage of the full tank." My daughter answered him, not even looking up from her healthy breakfast. I walked out of my room, pretending I had not heard his reluctance. Ethan was there, spinning the keys to the silver 4x4 SUV on his index finger. That beautiful, tough SUV with leather seats that smell so clean, I bought it 6 months ago. Supposedly, it was for me, so I could travel in comfort. But the truth is, Ethan claimed it from day one. "You just do not have the reflexes to drive a monster like this anymore, Grandma," he told me. And I, foolish and trusting, let him use it. The ride to the grocery store was a torment of blaring music, a boom, boom, boom that made my dentures vibrate. "Can you turn it down a little bit, sweetie?" I asked softly. "You are just too sensitive today, Grandma. This is the trend," he replied, rolling up his window to isolate himself from the world and from me. He did not turn down the volume. We got to the parking lot and he parked in the handicap spot, hanging my blue placard on the rearview mirror with a gesture of pure annoyance. As if being my driver was the most degrading job in the world, he got out without opening my door. I stepped down carefully, resting my swollen feet on the hot asphalt, and walked behind him. He was already staring at his phone, typing furiously with his thumbs. Inside the grocery store, the cold cut right through my shoulders. I pulled out my list, written in my handwriting that is starting to get shaky but is still perfectly clear. I needed simple things: lactose-free milk, whole wheat bread, and those peaches and syrup that I like to eat at night when insomnia pays me a visit. Ethan walked 10 feet ahead of me, sighing every time I stopped to compare prices. To him, money is just something that comes out of a wall. To me, every single dollar has a history. "Hurry up, Grandma," he told me when I stopped in the cleaning aisle. "I do not have all day." I said nothing. I learned a long time ago that arguing with a fool is just a waste of breath. I kept moving, pushing the shopping cart that had a wonky wheel. We made it to the canned goods aisle. My eyes searched for the brand of peaches I like, the one that is not too sweet. There they were, but on the top shelf. I am barely 5 feet tall now that the years have shrunk me. I got on my tiptoes, stretching my right arm. My fingers barely grazed the cold metal of the can. I felt a pull in my shoulder, that old pain reminding me of the years lifting boxes at the warehouse. I looked at Ethan. He was leaning against the cart, laughing at something on his screen. "Ethan, sweetie," I called out. He did not hear me, or he pretended not to. "Ethan!" I raised my voice a little more, touching his arm. He jumped and yanked out his wireless earbuds roughly. He looked at me with eyes I did not recognize, eyes completely empty of affection, full of a cruel impatience. "What? What do you want now?" "I cannot reach the peaches, honey. Could you get them down for me, please? They are right up there." That was when it happened. I do not know if it was the stress of his important things or if his true nature simply floated to the surface, like dirty oil on water. Ethan let out a loud snort, threw his head back, and yelled. He did not speak. He yelled. His voice echoed down the aisle, bouncing off the jelly jars and tuna cans. "Grandma, stop being so useless. For God's sake, I have important things to do, and you have me here wasting my time over some damn peaches." Time stood still. I felt the blood rush up to my cheeks, hot and stinging. It was not embarrassment for myself. It was second-hand embarrassment, deep and painful. A lady who was picking out olives turned around in pure shock. An employee stocking toilet paper froze with a pack right in midair. The silence that followed his scream was heavier than any piece of furniture I had ever lifted in my youth. Ethan, realizing he had yelled way too loud, looked around defiantly as if everyone else was to blame. Then, with a violent, jerky movement, he grabbed the can of peaches and slammed it into the cart with so much force that I feared he would dent the other groceries. "There it is. Are you happy?" he muttered, shoving his earbuds back in. I just stood there, right next to the shelf. My hands were gripping the handle of the shopping cart so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Useless. That word echoed in my head. Me, the woman who built a company from scratch when my husband died and left me with debt and 2 little kids. Me, the one who paid for his mother's private college tuition. Me, the one who put down the deposit for the house where he sleeps in until noon. Useless. I looked down. I did not want anyone to see my watery eyes. I was not going to cry. The women of my generation, the ones who worked among men and motor oil, we do not cry at the grocery store. "Go to the car," I told him, my voice so low that I had to repeat it. "Go to the car, Ethan." "What?" I said, "Go wait in the car," I ordered, and this time my voice had that sharp metallic edge I used to fire drunk drivers. He looked at me, surprised for a second, but then he just shrugged. "Whatever. Pay fast." He turned around and walked away, leaving me alone with the cart, the can of peaches, and the humiliation hanging heavy in the air. The lady by the olives approached, hesitant. "Ma'am, are you okay? What a rude young man." "I am fine, thank you," I replied, standing up as straight as my spine would allow. The youth of today are in such a rush and have so little memory. I finished my shopping alone. I walked to the checkout line with a calmness I did not actually feel. I paid with my debit card, that gold card that Ethan and Betty think is a bottomless pit. I bagged my own groceries because the bagger was nowhere to be found. I loaded the bags into the cart and walked out into the parking lot under the midday sun. Ethan was inside the SUV, engine running, air conditioning blasting on max. He saw me coming and did not even get out to help me load the bags into the trunk. I had to open the tailgate myself, lifting the heavy bags. My back ached, my knees hurt, but the sharpest pain was right in my chest. I climbed into the passenger seat in dead silence. "You took forever," he said, throwing the car into drive and stepping on the gas unnecessarily hard. "Just drive," I said, staring out the window. On the ride back, while he went back to humming along to his awful music, I stopped looking at the streets and started looking at the numbers. My mind, the one he called useless, started running an inventory. I remembered the day we went to the car dealership. He wanted the sports model. I insisted on the big SUV for family road trips. I signed the check. The title is in my name, locked away in the safe in my closet, right next to the birth certificates and the deed to the house. I pay the insurance every year. The maintenance gets drafted straight from my checking account. He only pays for gas, and sometimes not even that because he asks me to borrow money and conveniently forgets to pay me back. We got to the house. He parked, and for the first time, I noticed how possessively he turned off the engine and stroked the steering wheel. "All right, Grandma, I will help you bring the stuff inside, and then I am taking off. I'm already running late," he said, getting a little bit of his civilized tone back, probably because he wanted to ask me for money for the weekend later on. "Leave the bags right there in the entryway. I will put them away," I told him. "You sure?" "Well, better for me." He dropped the bags in the kitchen. He gave me a quick, dry peck on the forehead, which felt more like a slap of hypocrisy, and bolted out. "I am taking the SUV. I will be back tonight," he yelled from the door. I heard the engine roar and speed away. I stood there in the kitchen, surrounded by my groceries. I pulled out the can of peaches. It had a small dent right where it had slammed against the metal of the cart. I sat down on the wooden kitchen chair, the same one where I have drank my coffee for 30 years. The house was dead quiet. Betty would not be home until the afternoon. Useless. I got up and walked to my bedroom. I opened the closet and moved the old shoe boxes aside to get to the small safe built into the wall. My fingers spun the dial from memory. Right, left, right. The mechanism let out a satisfying click. I pulled out the document folder. There it was. The original bill of sale. The registration. Everything in the name of Alice Miller. I also pulled out a small red velvet case. Inside, there was no jewelry. There was a set of keys. The spare keys to the SUV. The ones I tucked away the day we bought it, just in case they got lost. Ethan did not even know they existed. He thought he had the only set. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the keys. They shined with a cold promise. My cell phone, a simple flip phone with large buttons, was on the nightstand. I grabbed it and scrolled through the contacts. I passed the names of my doctors, my daughter, my friends from church, until I got to the letter R. Roger, the auto shop. Roger was my head mechanic for 20 years. A man whose hands are permanently stained with grease and who has a loyalty that they just do not make anymore. He retired when I closed the company, but he still does jobs on his own and has a large fenced-in yard where he keeps spare parts. I dialed the number. It rang 3 times. "Hello?" Roger's raspy voice answered on the other end. "Roger, it is Alice." Mrs. Alice, what a miracle. "How is the boss lady doing? Did your washing machine break down again?" "No, Roger, the washing machine is working just fine. What is not working is the respect in this house." There was a brief silence. Roger knows me. He knows I do not call just to complain about the weather. "What do you need, ma'am? You just name it." "I need a favor, a discreet job, the kind we used to do when a client would not pay for their freight and we had to go repossess the truck." I heard a raspy little chuckle on the other end of the line. I really miss those days. "What are we talking about here?" "My SUV, the silver one, the one the boy uses." "The one your grandson drives? But he whips that thing all over town like he is a race car driver." "Exactly. This Saturday he has a big party to go to. He is going to leave the SUV parked outside his friend's house in Oakwood Estates, just like he always does. He's going to go drink and leave it there until the early hours of the morning." "And what exactly do you want me to do?" I squeezed the spare keys in my hand until the metal dug right into my skin. I remembered the scream at the grocery store, the pity on the cashier's face, the feeling of being a burden. "I want it to disappear, Roger." "What do you mean disappear, ma'am? Like a robbery?" "No, not a robbery. A repossession of property. I hold the title. I have the spare keys. I want you to go on Saturday night. Take the tow truck or whatever you want, but do not make a scene. You take the SUV and you lock it up in your furthest warehouse, where nobody can see it, where nobody can find it." "The kid is going to go crazy, Mrs. Alice. He is going to call the cops." "Let him call," I said, feeling an icy calm run down my spine. "I hold the title." Legally, I took my own vehicle. There is no crime here, but he is not going to know that. I want him to feel that drop in the pit of his stomach. I want him to know what it feels like to be stranded on foot, powerless, useless. Roger stayed quiet for a second, processing the order. "Are you sure? Look, this is going to stir up a massive family drama." I looked at my reflection in the vanity mirror. I saw my gray hair, my wrinkles, but I also saw the firm jawline I inherited from my father. "I have never been more sure, Roger." He said he had important things to do. Well, so do I. I am going to teach him a lesson in humility. Can you do it? For you, anything. On Saturday night, that SUV sleeps in my garage. Thank you, Roger. Oh, and one more thing. Tell me, if you find any of his things inside, his expensive sunglasses, his music, his designer jackets, Throw them in a black trash bag, one of the heavy-duty ones they use for garbage." I hung up the phone. My heart was beating a little faster, but not out of fear. It was an old rush of adrenaline that I thought had died a long time ago. I stood up and went to the kitchen. I opened the dented can of peaches, poured the contents into a glass bowl, and sat down to eat slowly, savoring the sweet syrup. Ethan came home late that night, reeking of expensive cologne and tobacco. "Hey, Grandma, I am back. Can I borrow $20 for gas tomorrow? It is practically on empty." I looked at him from my armchair, where I was knitting a lie with the same skill I used to use to audit invoices. "It is right there on the table, honey," I told him without even looking up. "Spend it well. Enjoy your SUV while you can." "What did you say?" he asked, already holding the $20 bill. I said, "Enjoy your youth while you can. It goes by fast." He laughed, that hollow, overconfident sound. "Oh, Grandma, always with your philosophical stuff. Get some rest." He went to his room. I stayed up a little while longer, listening to the tick-tock of the wall clock. There were 4 days left until Saturday. 4 days of being the useless grandma, the invisible grandma. But Saturday was going to be a very interesting day. I turned off the living room lights, smiling in the dark. The game had just begun, and my grandson did not even know that I was playing with loaded dice. Saturday arrived with a cloudy sky, as if the weather knew a storm was brewing, but not one made of rain. Ethan spent the whole morning detailing the SUV. He washed it, waxed it, put tire shine on the wheels, whistling the entire time. He was getting ready for his big night out. "Looks spotless, does it not, Grandma?" he bragged at noon, walking into the kitchen for a glass of water. "Yes, honey, it looks beautiful. Take good care of it," I answered, chopping carrots with a razor-sharp knife. "Obviously, I take care of it. It is my ride." "Your ride," I thought. "Your borrowed ride." At 8 o'clock that night, he got dressed up in his best clothes, a designer shirt, a flashy watch, Italian loafers. "I am heading out. Do not wait up for me. I am going to Jake's party in Oakwood Estates. I will be back tomorrow." "Have fun," my daughter Betty said from the couch, not even looking away from the television. "Bye, Grandma," he yelled from the door, without even turning to look at me. "Goodbye, Ethan," I whispered. I heard the engine start and speed off down the street. I waited 10 minutes. Then I grabbed my cell phone and sent a text message. Just 2 words. He left. The response came back instantly. A thumbs-up emoji. I went to bed early that night. I slept like a baby, deeply and peacefully. I knew that the next day, Sunday morning, the phone would ring with panicked screams, and I would be right there with my cup of coffee, ready to watch the show. What I did not know was that fate had a funny way of complicating things, and that what we were going to find inside that SUV would turn the plan from a simple lesson into an all-out war. Sunday dawned with that thick silence that always precedes a disaster, or in this case, justice. While my daughter and my grandson were sleeping off the hangovers of their superficial lives, I was already up, dressed in my Sunday church clothes, even though my destination was a very different kind of sanctuary. The phone rang at 6 o'clock on the dot, just one ring before I picked it up. "It is here, boss lady." Roger's voice sounded tense, much more than usual. "But you need to come see this. There is stuff in the trunk that... well, it is better if you just see it for yourself. I am on my way." I hung up gently. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror. I did not see the old lady who could not reach the peaches. I saw Alice Miller, the woman who negotiated contracts with corrupt labor unions and survived 3 major economic crashes. I grabbed my purse, that old leather one that weighs as much as a brick, and pulled an object out of my drawer that I had not touched in years, my old Swiss Army knife, the one I used to use to cut open boxes at the warehouse. The metal was cold, but it felt right in my hand. I slipped out of the house without making a sound. The sun was barely painting the rooftops orange. I called a cab at the corner, far away from the prying eyes of my nosy neighbors. "To the Golden Piston Auto Shop." "In the industrial district," I instructed the driver. The man looked at me through his rearview mirror with a weird expression. An older lady in a floral dress and orthopedic shoes, heading to an auto repair shop at the crack of dawn. He did not say a word, but I saw him lock the doors. We arrived 20 minutes later. Roger's shop is a massive warehouse with a tin roof, surrounded by a tall fence topped with barbed wire. It smells like a mix of burnt oil, gasoline, and black coffee. To me, that is the smell of progress. The smell of my life. Roger was waiting for me at the front gate. In his late 60s, he still wears the same grease-stained blue coveralls. He took his cap off when he saw me, a gesture of pure respect that my own grandson has never once shown. "Come on in, Mrs. Alice. The body is out back." We walked past skeletons of junked cars and mountains of old tires, and there it was, my silver SUV, shining out of place among the scrap metal and the dirt. It looked completely untouched, powerful, completely separated from Ethan's unworthy hands. "No trouble bringing it in," Roger said, wiping his hands on an old rag. "The kid left it unlocked. Can you believe it? Unlocked, windows rolled down, right in front of a house where the bass was rattling the glass. I just hopped right in. I fired it up with your spare key and nobody even noticed." "He is an arrogant idiot," I mumbled, running my hand across the cold hood. "He thinks the whole world owes him protection." "But that is not the worst part, ma'am. Pop the trunk." I felt a knot form in my stomach. What could Ethan have possibly done? Drugs? Something illegal? I walked around to the back and lifted the tailgate. There were no dead bodies or kilos of white powder. There were boxes. 3 clear plastic bins, the kind you use to organize when you are moving. I peeked into the first one. It was packed with designer clothes, all with the price tags still attached. Shirts worth hundreds of dollars, shoes that cost more than my monthly pension check. "That is not all," Roger said, pointing to the second bin. I looked inside. It was filled with electronics. 2 laptops, 3 tablets, video game consoles, all brand new, or practically new. But it was the third box that made my blood run ice cold. Inside, there was a blue velvet bag. I recognized it instantly. It was the bag where I kept the silverware set my mother gifted me on my wedding day. Antique, heavy silverware, engraved with our family initials. I had been looking all over my house for them for months. Betty had told me that I had probably just misplaced them, that my memory was starting to fail me. "You are just getting old, Mom. You are losing everything," she had told me, using that fake patience people use when dealing with children and seniors. I opened the bag. They were in there, but the soup spoons were missing. Right next to the silverware was a wad of crumpled papers. I grabbed them, my hands shaking, not from old age, but from pure rage. They were pawn shop tickets, quick cash pawn, the local pawn shop. The dates were from 3, 4, 6 months ago. I read the descriptions. A gold ring with a ruby, my engagement ring, the one I thought I had lost out in the garden, a 14-karat gold chain, the one from my baptism, a men's Omega watch, the one that belonged to my late husband. I had to lean against the bumper of the SUV to keep from collapsing. I could not catch my breath for a second. It was not just that he was driving my car around. Ethan was stealing from me. He was dismantling me piece by piece, selling off my memories just to fund his life full of important things. And my daughter? Did she know? Or was she just as blind as I had been pretending to be? "The boy is in serious debt, ma'am," Roger said quietly, handing me a bottle of water. "I found this in the glove compartment." He handed me a small spiral notebook. I flipped it open. It was a list full of names and dollar amounts. The Russian, $15,000. Bobby, $8,000. Gambling debts. My grandson, the boy who screamed and called me useless because I could not reach a can of peaches, was a 2-bit gambler who was pawning away my life to pay for his vices. Useless, I whispered. And this time, that word tasted entirely different. It was bitter, metallic. I slammed the notebook shut. The sound was sharp, definitive. "What do we do, boss? I can call the cops right now." "With all this, they will lock him up for sure." I looked around me. The garage, my old tools hanging on the back wall. Because yes, many of those tools used to be mine. I gave them to Roger when I closed up shop. I remembered the years when nobody would bet a single dime on me. When the truckers used to say that a woman could never run a fleet, I never called the cops on them. I made them work for me. Or I drove them completely out of business with pure strategy. No, Roger. No cops. That would be way too easy. He would just get out on bail, my daughter would foot the bill, or they would try to guilt-trip me into thinking I ruined the poor boy's future. I stood up straight. The pain in my back completely vanished. The arthritis in my fingers seemed to just evaporate under the burning heat of my fury. We are going to play his game, but by my rules. I started pacing around the SUV, evaluating the situation. "Strip it all out," I commanded. "The clothes, the electronics, the pawn tickets, my silver, everything. Lock it inside your office and put a double padlock on the door." "What about the SUV?" "The SUV stays right here. You are going to take off all 4 wheels. You are going to leave it sitting on cinder blocks, like it got stripped down in a rough neighborhood. And you are going to cover it up with that old filthy tarp you have sitting out back." "What for?" "Because if he ever figures out where it is, I want him to see it completely useless. But he is not going to know where it is. Not yet, anyway." I pulled out my wallet and handed Roger $300 bills. "For your breakfast and for your total silence. Nobody knows this vehicle is here. If anyone asks, you have not seen a thing. I am a vault, boss." My lips are sealed. I tucked the pawn tickets and the ledger of debts into my purse. Those papers weighed more than solid lead, but right now, they were my ammunition. "Could you call me a cab? I need to get back before they wake up and realize their entire world has just collapsed." While I waited for the taxi, I sat down on a grease-stained wooden bench. I pulled out my cell phone. It was 7:30 in the morning. On the screen, a picture of Ethan as a little boy smiling a toothless grin. I felt a sharp pang of pain, mourning the sweet child he used to be, the one I loved so deeply. But then I remembered the screaming match at the grocery store. I remembered that look of pure disgust. And I looked down at the pawn shop receipts in my hand. That little boy simply did not exist anymore. What was left was a parasite that needed to be purged. For years, they have treated me as if my brain dried up at the exact same time as my skin. They talked to me slowly. They explained things to me that I already knew long before they were even born. They just assume that my uselessness is some natural condition that comes with my age. What they have not realized is that my silence is not senility. It is caution. It is the raw patience of a predator. The taxi finally pulled up. I climbed in with great difficulty, putting on that act of fragility that was now going to be my perfect disguise. "To Elmwood neighborhood, please, and step on it." The ride back was a journey inside my own mind. I pictured myself signing massive checks, firing incompetent staff, negotiating freight rates in the dead of the night. That woman had never left. She was just taking a rest. And now, Ethan had kicked her wide awake. I got back home at 8:15. Everything was still dead quiet. I unlocked the door with my own key. I slipped off my shoes in the entryway so I would not make a single sound. I walked to my bedroom, hid the pawn tickets and the ledger in the safe, right next to the title of the SUV. Then I headed to the kitchen. I put some water on the stove to boil. I grabbed my favorite mug, the one with the tiny crack right on the rim. I brewed some chamomile tea. I sat down at the dining room table directly facing the front door, and I waited. At 9:30, I heard the very first noise. Hurried footsteps rushing down the stairs. It was not Ethan, it was Betty. "Mom, have you seen Ethan?" she asked, walking into the kitchen with her cell phone in her hand and a look of deep panic on her face. "He is not answering his phone, and he never came home to sleep." I took a slow sip of my tea, feeling the warmth slide down my throat. "No, sweetie. I'm sure he just crashed at his friend's place. You know how those parties get." Yeah, but we were supposed to go have breakfast with your brother and sister at 10. I specifically told him to be here early. Right at that exact moment, the front door burst open. He did not walk inside. He stumbled in. Ethan was pale, sweating profusely, his expensive designer shirt completely wrinkled and unbuttoned, his eyes practically bulging out of his skull. He looked like he had just seen a ghost, or even worse, reality. "Mom, Mom," he screamed, his voice cracking. Betty ran over to him. "Ethan, what happened to you? Why do you look like this? Did you get mugged?" He collapsed onto the living room sofa, gasping for air. I stayed right there at the table, watching him over the rim of my mug. "The SUV," he panted. "The SUV. What about the SUV? Did you crash it?" Betty asked, checking him all over for any injuries. Ethan looked up and his eyes locked onto mine for just a split second. He was expecting to see some compassion, I guess, or the foolish old grandmother who would just hand over the cash to fix the problem. What he actually saw was an old woman, sipping her tea with absolute chilling calmness. "It is gone," Ethan sobbed, burying his face in his hands. "It is gone. It got stolen." Betty let out a choked gasp. "What do you mean it got stolen? From where?" "I left it parked right outside Jake's house. I walked outside an hour ago and it was just gone." "It was not there, Mom. It just disappeared." "But it has an alarm on it." "It has a GPS tracker," Betty yelled, totally hysterical. "Ah, the GPS, minor detail. I deactivated that tracker 3 months ago because they were charging a monthly subscription fee that felt like daylight robbery. And anyway, I practically never used the car myself. Ethan, of course, never bothered to check if it was even still active." "I do not know. I do not know," Ethan started crying, huge crocodile tears mixed with very real, sheer panic. He knew exactly what was inside that trunk. He was not crying over the vehicle. He was crying over the pawn tickets, the stolen clothes, the ledger full of dangerous debts. He was crying because his entire house of cards was locked in a trunk that was completely wiped off the map. "We have to call the cops right now," Betty said, pulling out her phone. "No!" Ethan's scream was so high-pitched that it startled both of us. "No, do not call the cops." "Are you crazy? This is grand theft auto. We have to file a report for the insurance company." I said no. Ethan stood up, shaking like a leaf. First, I am going to go look for it myself." "Maybe a tow truck took it." "Yeah, that has got to be it. A tow truck." "I am going to go check the impound lots." Betty looked at him, totally confused. "Ethan, that makes absolutely zero sense. If it was a tow truck, there is a public record of it. We can just call the city transit department and find out." "Just let me handle it," he insisted, with a level of sheer desperation that was starting to look extremely suspicious, even to his own mother. It was my turn. I set my mug down on the saucer with a soft, gentle clink. "The boy is right, Betty," I chimed in, using my exhausted grandma voice. "Maybe he parked illegally and they towed it away. Why do you not let him go look?" Ethan looked at me. There was utter confusion written all over his face. Was the useless old woman actually defending him? Yeah, Grandma is right. I am going to go search for it." "I will be right back." He bolted out of the house like the floors were on fire, unshowered, on an empty stomach, and without a single dime, because I am sure his wallet was bone dry. Betty turned to face me, placing her hands firmly on her hips. "Mom, you are always enabling him. That SUV costs an absolute fortune. If it got stolen, the insurance company will not pay a single cent if we do not report it within 24 hours. Just let the kid solve his own problems, sweetie," I told her, standing up from my chair as slowly as I could. "He specifically said he had important things to do. Well, looking for the SUV is the most important thing right now, do you not think?" I walked back toward my bedroom. I felt an electric, vibrant energy coursing through my entire body. Phase 1 was officially complete. The mouse was now running wildly through the maze, desperately searching for a piece of cheese that I had already eaten. But this was only just the beginning. Now that I knew all about the pawn shops, my plan was going to have to evolve. Just taking away his favorite toy was not going to be enough. I needed to expose the rot from the inside out. I sat down on my bed and pulled out the ledger of debts again. The Russian. That name sounded familiar to me. He was an underworld loan shark who operated near the wholesale produce market, right around the area where my old offices used to be 20 years ago. Extremely dangerous people. If Ethan owed money to those kinds of guys, the stolen SUV was the absolute least of his problems. Or maybe it was actually his death sentence. I smiled, not a sweet smile, it was a shark smile. "You wanted some action, Alice?" I whispered to myself. Well, here it is. I grabbed the phone and dialed Roger again. "Boss lady?" "Roger, change of plans. I need you to dig through the old toolbox, the one tucked underneath my workbench at your shop." "Yeah? Check and tell me if the spare key is still in there, the one to Ethan's bachelor pad, the one he thinks nobody knows about, the one he pays for using the money he steals from his mother." There was a heavy silence on the other end. "I got it right here, ma'am, labeled as an emergency." "Perfect. Tonight we are going to pay a little visit. If my grandson thinks losing his ride was bad, just wait until he sees what I am going to do to his little sanctuary." I hung up the phone. Out in the hallway, I could hear Betty crying on the phone to one of her friends. Poor Betty. She was about to learn a very harsh lesson, too, even if she did not know exactly what it was yet. I laid back for a moment, closing my eyes. Useless grandma. The words kept echoing, but they did not hurt anymore. Now they were fuel. High-octane gasoline pouring straight into an engine that had just roared to life. Ethan's sheer terror was palpable. You could practically smell it in the air of the house. And I, old Grandma Alice, was going to be the one who decided exactly when and how his nightmare would end, or when the real one was going to begin. Monday morning. The house smelled like freshly brewed coffee and stale, rotten fear. While I spread butter on my toast with a very deliberate calmness, I watched my grandson pace around the kitchen like a trapped, caged animal. Ethan had not slept a single wink. His eyes were completely bloodshot, and his hands were shaking so bad that he almost knocked over a glass of orange juice. "Still no news on the SUV, honey?" I asked, bringing my coffee mug up to my lips. The hot steam slightly fogged up my glasses. Ethan stopped dead in his tracks, staring at me with a mix of pure irritation and blinding panic. "No, Grandma. I already told you no. I drove to 3 different impound lots yesterday. Nobody has it." It is like the earth just swallowed it whole. Betty walked into the kitchen, her phone glued to her ear, wearing that martyr expression she perfected right after her divorce. "Yes, officer. It is a silver 4x4. No. My son says he does not want to file an official police report quite yet because—" Betty paused and looked right at Ethan, who was frantically making a slicing motion across his own throat with his finger. "Because he thinks it's just a prank by his friends." "Yes, thank you." She hung up the phone and let out a huge, dramatic sigh. "Ethan, this is completely ridiculous. If this is a joke from your buddies, it is in terrible taste. That SUV is worth over $50,000. Your grandmother is left with absolutely no transportation." "Do not worry about me, sweetheart," I chimed in gently. "I will manage. At my age, a little walking is good for the blood circulation. Besides, it is not like I have important things to do, right, Ethan?" He completely missed the biting irony. He was way too busy checking his cell phone every 10 seconds, waiting, I assumed, for a ransom call from the supposed car thieves. What he did not know was that the master thief was sitting directly across from him, quietly eating strawberry jam. "I am leaving," Ethan blurted out suddenly, snatching the keys to his mother's compact sedan. "I need to go meet up with a few contacts, just to see if they know anything." "But honey, what about your college classes today?" Betty whined. "To hell with college, Mom. My entire life is inside that SUV." He stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the glass panes on the china cabinet rattled. Betty collapsed into a chair, sniffling. "Oh, Mom, I have no idea what is getting into this boy. He's just very on edge right now. Just let him be, Betty. Sometimes men need to completely lose something before they actually learn to value what they have," I told her, giving her hand a gentle, comforting pat. "I'm going to step out for a little while. I need to run downtown to buy some knitting yarn." "Do you want me to call you an Uber?" "No, thank you. I will just take the bus. It helps keep me distracted." I walked out of the house with my large purse strapped securely across my chest. Of course, I was not going to go buy any knitting yarn. I had a very different route mapped out inside my head. A route that started on the loudest, busiest streets downtown, where the smell of street food carts and the screaming of vendors hide the shady businesses operating deep in the shadows. My very first stop was the pawn shop on Main Street. The old, run-down building with its heavy wrought iron bars had always seemed like a monument built to profit off other people's desperation. I walked right in, ignoring the judgmental stare of the security guard who probably thought I was there to pawn my earrings just to afford my prescription meds. I walked straight up to window number 3. I reached into my purse and pulled out the pawn tickets I had salvaged from the SUV's trunk. "Good morning, young man. I am here to redeem some items," I said, sliding the slips of paper and my debit card underneath the thick, bulletproof glass. The cashier, a kid with a terminally bored expression on his face, grabbed the tickets. When he looked down at the dollar amounts and the item descriptions, his eyebrows shot straight up. "This is quite a few high-value items, ma'am. An Omega watch, a heavy gold chain, a ruby ring. Are you picking up all of it?" "Every single piece." "That is going to be about $3,000 total, plus the interest fees." "Run the card," I said, punching in my PIN code with absolute firmness. 15 minutes later, I walked out of those doors with a heavy velvet bag sitting at the bottom of my purse. I sat down on a bench in the nearby town square and opened it up. I pulled out my late husband's watch, Robert's watch. The glass face was dirty, but the internal mechanism was still running perfectly. Tick-tock, tick-tock. That sound brought a massive wave of memories crashing over me, but it also brought back that icy, burning fury. Ethan had not just stolen a random object. He had stolen the very memory of his own grandfather, just to toss it away on some gambling table. I slid the ruby ring onto my ring finger. It fit me a little loose now that my fingers had thinned out with age, but it shined with a bright, vengeful red light. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Roger. "Boss lady, I am parked right outside the address you gave me, the red brick apartment building. I am on my way over." I hailed a cab. Ethan's bachelor pad was located in an area that Betty would consider bohemian and artsy, but I just considered pretentious and way too expensive. It was an old, remodeled building, the kind where there are absolutely no elevators. But there is plenty of loud, obnoxious paint slapped all over the hallway walls. Roger was waiting for me at the entrance, trying to blend in by pretending to check the engine on his own beat-up old truck. "Did you bring the key, ma'am?" he whispered as I walked up to him. "Right here. The exact copy I kept when I gave him the cash for his security deposit 2 years ago. He swore to me he needed a place to study in peace. Let's see just how much studying he actually gets done." We walked up to the second floor. My knees protested loudly with every single step, but my sheer willpower forced them to keep moving. We arrived at door 2B. I slid the key into the lock. It turned as smooth as butter. The smell hit us before anything else. It did not smell like textbooks or a quiet study hall. It reeked of stale tobacco, spilled beer, and that very specific damp smell of closed-off spaces where highly illicit things happen. We stepped inside. Roger closed the heavy door right behind us. "Good heavens," the mechanic muttered under his breath. The place was an absolute disaster zone. There were greasy pizza boxes piled high in a corner, dirty laundry strewn absolutely everywhere, and empty bottles of top-shelf liquor. But the thing that completely dominated the living room was not the domestic mess. It was a professional-grade poker table, complete with green felt, surrounded by cheap folding chairs. On the wall, a large whiteboard was covered in scribbled names and dollar figures. Jake, $5,000, Bobby, plus $2,000. Ethan was not just a gambler. He was actually hosting the games. My grandson, the supposed model college student, was running a trashy underground casino for all his rich little friends. "Start searching, Roger," I ordered, feeling my jaw clench tight. "Find where he stashes the cash or the IOUs." While Roger started tearing through the kitchen drawers, I walked straight into the bedroom. There was a bare mattress just tossed on the floor, no sheets. On the nightstand, right next to an overflowing ashtray, I found something that froze my blood far worse than the theft of my own car. It was a photograph, a picture of my own house taken from the street. It was blurry, like it had been snapped from a moving vehicle, and taped right to the picture was a threatening note, written in thick red marker on a paper napkin. "You have until Friday, little prince. If you do not pay up, we collect from the old lady's house." I had to sit down hard on the edge of that filthy mattress. The old lady, that was me. Ethan was in so deep that pawning my jewelry was not enough to cover him anymore. He had literally put my safety, my very own home, up as collateral to cover his debts with some extremely dangerous people. "Mrs. Alice, you need to come see this," Roger called out to me from the living room. I walked back out, quickly shoving the photo and the note deep into my purse. Roger was holding a shoebox in his hands. "There is no cash anywhere, boss, but I did find this." "It is keys, a whole lot of keys." I looked down into the box. It was filled with car key fobs, Audi, BMW, Mercedes. "What exactly does this mean?" I asked him. "It means the kid is taking cars as collateral from his buddies when they cannot pay up," Roger said, his brow deeply furrowed. "Or even worse, he is using these cars to move product around. Ma'am, this is not just some silly college prank anymore. This is serious federal crime territory." I stared at the poker table, the empty liquor bottles, the absolute filth. I thought back to his screaming fit at the grocery store. Useless. Yes, to him I was totally useless. Just a bothersome old hurdle occupying a house that he already saw as his very own personal piggy bank to pay off his massive mistakes. But this useless old woman had just uncovered the complete blueprint to his ultimate destruction. "Leave everything exactly the way it is, Roger," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "Do not take a single thing with you." "Not even the keys?" "Nothing. I want him to truly believe that his dirty little secret is perfectly safe in here. But I need you to do one more thing for me." "Whatever you say." "Get me a camera, one of those tiny hidden ones. I want one right here, pointed dead center at that table, and I want another one right by the front door. I want to know exactly who comes in and who goes out. And more than anything, I want to see the face of this Russian guy if he ever decides to show up. Consider it done. I will have them installed by tomorrow morning." We walked out of the apartment with the exact same stealth we had used to sneak inside. As we made our way back down the stairs, I felt a heavy, brand new weight settle into my chest. This was no longer just about teaching the arrogant kid a lesson in humility. Now it was about saving my entire life's work and my property. And even though it pained me to admit it, it was about saving my idiot grandson's life before he ended up face down in a ditch. But in order to save him, I had to completely destroy him first. I had to break the legs off his towering arrogance so he could not keep sprinting straight toward the edge of a cliff. I got back to the house around 2 p.m. Betty was in the living room watching a soap opera, her eyes completely red and puffy from crying so much. "Did Ethan come home?" I asked, walking in with my fake shopping bags. "He got here a little while ago. He is in his room. He says he has a migraine." "Mom, he is acting so strange. I just asked him if he wanted anything to eat and he screamed right in my face." "Just let him be, sweetie." I'm going to go make lunch. I really have a craving for a nice, slow-cooked stew today. I walked right into the kitchen. While I was chopping the potatoes, I slipped Robert's watch onto my left wrist. It was huge on me, dancing around on my bone, but I tightened the strap as much as I could. The ruby ring shined on my right hand. I set the table. I called Betty and then went to Ethan's room. I knocked on the door softly. "Go away, Mom," he yelled from inside. "It is me, Ethan, Grandma." There was a heavy silence, then slow footsteps. He opened the door. He looked terrible, with dark circles under his eyes, messy hair, and a sweaty shirt. "What do you want?" he said, lacking the energy to even yell. "Lunch is ready, and I am not taking no for an answer. In this house, we eat as a family, whether you have a car or not." He looked at me with hatred, but also with deep resignation. He knew he depended on me to eat, since he surely did not have a single penny in his pocket. "I will be out in 5 minutes." I turned around and walked to the dining room. I sat at the head of the table, my usual spot. Betty sat to my right. Ethan came in, dragging his feet, and dropped into the chair on the left. I started serving the stew. The smell of bay leaves and meat filled the tense silence. "Did you find anything out about your SUV?" I asked, serving him a generous portion. "No," he mumbled, staring at his plate. "I went to see some friends, but nobody knows anything." "How strange," I said, cutting a piece of meat. "You know, this morning, while I was running errands downtown, I remembered something your grandfather used to say. He said that material things come and go, but shame sticks around forever." Ethan let out a sarcastic snort, but did not look up. "Can we skip the cheap philosophy, Grandma? I am having a crappy day." "All right, let's talk about real things," I said, and placed my silverware on the table. I raised my left hand to grab my glass of water. The movement was slow, highly theatrical. The sleeve of my sweater slid down, fully revealing the gold and steel Omega watch. Ethan was bringing a spoonful of food up to his mouth, his eyes locked onto my wrist. The spoon stopped right in midair. I saw his pupils dilate. He recognized the watch. Of course he recognized it. He had taken it to the pawn shop himself 3 months ago. He knew that watch was supposed to be locked in a safe at Quick Cash Pawn, waiting for the deadline to expire so it could be auctioned off. His gaze jumped from my wrist to my face. I was staring right at him with a neutral, almost sweet expression. "Is something wrong, honey?" I asked. "You look completely frozen." That watch," he stammered. His voice was just a whisper. "Oh, yes," I said, caressing the watch face with my other hand, where the ruby ring shot red flashes of light. "Your grandfather's watch. Look how funny things work out. I had been looking for it for months. I thought I had lost it because of my bad memory. You know how useless I am, but today, miraculously, it turned up." Betty looked up, smiling naively. "Oh, that is wonderful, Mom. You were so sad about that watch. Where was it?" I locked eyes with Ethan. He was pale, as if his blood pressure had just plummeted. Drops of cold sweat began to form on his forehead. "It was in a very safe place, sweetie," I answered without breaking eye contact with my grandson. "A place where people store valuable things when they need fast cash. But the important thing is that it is back with its rightful owner, because everything that belongs to me always comes back to me, sooner or later." Ethan dropped his spoon. It hit the plate with a loud, metallic clatter. "I am not hungry," he said, jumping up from his chair. The wood scraped loudly against the floor. "But you have not eaten a single bite," Betty insisted. "I feel sick," he yelled, and ran out toward his room. We heard the door slam and then the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place. Betty looked at me with worry. "Mom, I think we should take him to the doctor. He is acting crazy." "It is not insanity, Betty. It is a guilty conscience, and you cannot cure that with pills." I kept eating my stew. It was delicious, but the real satisfaction did not come from the food. It came from knowing the message had been delivered. Ethan now knew I had been to the pawn shop. He knew I had his pawn tickets, but he did not know if I knew he had stolen my things or if he thought I just found them by accident. That lingering doubt was going to eat him alive. That afternoon, the vibe in the house shifted. It was no longer just tension, it was thick paranoia. Ethan did not leave his room. I sat in the living room knitting, humming an old tune. Around 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Betty went to answer it. "Mom, it is for you, a courier." I stood up. At the door was a young man on a motorcycle holding a manila envelope. "Mrs. Alice Miller?" "That is me." "Sign here, please." I signed. The kid left. I closed the door. Betty looked at me curiously. "What is that?" "Insurance papers, I think." I lied. I went to my room and opened the envelope. They were not insurance papers. It was a preliminary report I had requested from an old lawyer friend, using the details I found in Ethan's ledger. There was a list of properties associated with the name The Russian, and one of those properties was a massive warehouse that shared a wall with the old hub of my moving company, the one I sold 5 years ago, but still kept the original blueprints for. I smiled. Fate has a twisted, macabre sense of humor. Suddenly, I heard a noise out in the hallway, stealthy footsteps. I walked over to my bedroom door and pressed my ear against it. It was Ethan. He was talking on his cell phone in a very low voice, almost whispering. "I am telling you I cannot pay today. My SUV got stolen. No, I'm not lying. Please, just give me 1 more week." "What?" "No, do not mess with my grandmother. She has nothing to do with this. She is just a clueless old woman." I stepped away from the door. My heart was pounding, but not out of fear of the threat. It was the confirmation. He knew I was in danger because of him, and still, his very first reaction was to call me a clueless old woman. I went back to my armchair and looked at the manila envelope. I looked at my husband's watch. I looked at my wrinkled hands that had lifted heavy boxes, signed massive checks, and now held the ultimate fate of my family. I pulled out my cell phone and typed a quick message to Roger. "Get the big tow truck ready. Tomorrow we are moving something much heavier than an SUV." Ethan thought he was playing cat and mouse with me. What he did not know was that I was not the cat. I was the owner of the house, and I was about to call the exterminator. That night, when I walked past his bedroom door, I heard a muffled sob. I stopped for a second. A part of me, the grandmother who used to change his diapers, wanted to go in and hug him, but the other part, the woman who was publicly humiliated, remembered the note threatening my home. I kept walking toward my bedroom. The lesson was only halfway over, and tomorrow Ethan would discover that there are far worse things than losing a vehicle. Like losing the ground beneath your very feet. The darkness of the night wrapped around the house, but I slept with one eye open. I knew the Russian would not wait until Friday if he found out the SUV was missing. I had to get ahead of him. The chess game had turned into a race against the clock, and I had just decided to sacrifice a pawn to capture the king. Wednesday dawned, with a sky the color of a donkey's belly, gray and heavy, the kind that predicts a lightning storm. But the real electricity was not up in the clouds, it was right in my living room. Ethan paced back and forth, wearing out the Persian rug I bought 20 years ago. He was biting his nails, a nervous habit he had not had since he was a little boy, and every time a car drove by the street, he peeked out the window with sheer terror painted in his eyes. I was sitting in my armchair knitting a scarf I had no intention of actually finishing, watching the show. Betty, my daughter, was in the kitchen brewing linden tea, crying softly because she could feel the tension but could not grasp the true gravity of it all. She believes problems are solved with herbal tea and good vibes. I know problems are solved with money, intelligence, and sometimes a really good scare. "Ethan, if you keep pacing like that, you are going to burn a hole in the floor," I said, without losing count of my knitting stitches. "Leave me alone, Grandma," he yelled at me, but his voice lacked the power it had on Sunday. It was a high-pitched, hysterical scream. "You do not understand anything. They are outside." "Who is outside?" "Them!" He pointed a shaking finger at the window. "There has been a black sedan parked on the corner since 7 in the morning. It is them. They are here to collect." I stood up slowly, dropping the knitting into the basket. I walked over to the window and moved the curtain just a fraction. Sure enough, a dark car with tinted windows was parked on the corner. I recognized the model and the stance of the man leaning against the door, smoking a cigarette. They were not movie hitmen. They were neighborhood debt collectors, the kind who break kneecaps if there's no cash to collect. Well, if they are here to collect, you better have a way to pay them, I said, going back to my seat with a calmness that looked like sheer madness to him. I do not have it. Ethan pulled his hair in desperation. Everything was in the SUV, my capital, my stuff to sell. Without that SUV, I am a dead man, Grandma, dead. Betty walked in with the tea tray, shaking so badly that the porcelain cups were rattling. Honey, please calm down. Can we just call the cops? No! Ethan lunged at her and smacked the tray right out of her hands. The hot tea spilled all over the floor and the porcelain shattered into pieces. If you call the cops, they will kill me today. I owe money to the Russian. Do you know who the Russian is? He owns half the city. Betty burst into tears, crouching down to pick up the broken pieces. Watching my daughter get humiliated by her own son, the one she spoiled into total uselessness, was the drop that made my cup overflow. But I did not yell. Those who yell lose control. I, Alice Miller, never lose control. Sit down, Ethan, I ordered. My voice came out low and raspy, like the sound of a tire on gravel. I do not have time for your old lady lectures. I said sit down. I slammed my cane against the coffee table. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot. Ethan, shocked by the sudden authority radiating from my 5-foot frame, collapsed onto the sofa. He looked at me, breathing heavily. Betty, go to your room, I told my daughter without looking at her. Close the door and do not come out until I tell you to. But Mom, now. Betty ran out of the room. We were left alone. The silence was dense. Ethan looked at me with a mix of fear and disgust. What are you going to do? Give me your pension savings, he scoffed, trying to scrape up his arrogance. I need $20,000 today, Grandma. Your $100 a week will not help me. I reached into my sweater pocket and pulled out the pawn tickets. I tossed them onto the coffee table. They fell like dead leaves, but they weighed like a death sentence. Ethan saw them. His eyes opened cartoonishly wide. He went pale, then red, then gray. Where did you get these? He whispered. From the exact same place I got this. I placed the gambling ledger on the table. And this. I pulled out the picture of the house with the threat written in red. He pressed himself into the back of the sofa as if I were some monster that had just crawled out of the shadows. You went into my apartment. I go wherever I please, boy. I am old, not an invalid. And while you were playing the big-shot gambler with your mother's money and my jewelry, I was cleaning up your mess. You have the SUV? He asked, as realization smacked him in the face like a brick. You have the SUV. You thief! Give it back to me. He stood up, intending to charge at me, but I did not even flinch. If you take one more step, I will call that man on the corner and tell him you have absolutely no intention of paying, I said calmly, picking up my cell phone. Ethan froze. You would not do that. I am your grandson. And I am the useless one, remember. The one who is just a burden at the grocery store. The one who has no important things to do. Well, guess what? Today I actually have something very important to do. Decide whether you get saved or whether you sink. He started to cry again, but this time it was a cry of pure defeat. He covered his face with his hands. Grandma, please, they are going to kill me. The Russian does not forgive. I told him I would pay him today by selling the SUV. If he finds out I do not have it... Shut up and listen to me closely. I leaned forward. You are going to go to the bathroom, you are going to wash that coward's face, you are going to put on a clean shirt, and you are going to come back down here in 5 minutes. We are going out. Where? To the police? No. We are going to go recover your dignity, if you have any left, and we are going to go see my SUV, because it is mine, Ethan. It was always mine. 5 minutes later, we slipped out the back door. Roger was waiting for us in the alley with his trusted taxi. Ethan climbed in with his head down, looking everywhere just in case the black sedan appeared. "To the auto shop, Roger," I said. The ride was dead silent. Ethan was curled up in his seat, formed into a ball. I sat up perfectly straight, looking out at the city I had watched grow. We drove through the industrial zone past the old warehouses. "I worked here for 40 years, I told him, pointing at a large building. "I loaded trucks with my bare hands while I was pregnant with your mother. I negotiated with labor unions that wanted to set my trucks on fire. And you fall apart because some third-rate thug threatens you." "He is not just any thug, Grandma. He is dangerous." "Danger is relative, honey. It all depends on who holds the control." We arrived at the Golden Piston. Roger opened the electric gate and we pulled inside. The smell of grease and metal welcomed us. Roger led us straight to the back. And there it was. Ethan let out a choked gasp. The silver SUV was sitting on 4 concrete cinder blocks. It had no wheels. The hood was popped open and the battery was gone. The leather seats had been completely ripped out and stacked to the side. It looked like the carcass of a majestic animal that had been devoured by piranhas. "My SUV! What did you do to it?" Ethan screamed, running toward the dismantled vehicle. "I made it invisible," I said, walking up behind him, leaning heavily on my cane. "If the Russian comes looking for it, he will not find it driving around. And if anyone comes in here, all they will see is junk." "But you ruined it." He spun toward me furiously. "It is worth a fortune. I could have sold it to pay him." "You could not sell it because it does not belong to you," I reminded him coldly. "And I did not ruin it. Roger is the best mechanic I know. He can take apart and rebuild an engine with his eyes closed. This is just camouflage." Ethan touched the cold metal of the car. He was completely devastated. His ultimate status symbol, his ride, reduced to a pile of Lego bricks. "So now what?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I have no car. I have no money, and the Russian is going to show up at the house any minute." "He's not going to the house," I said, checking my wristwatch, the Omega I recovered, which was now proudly displayed on my wrist. "Because I told him to meet us here." Ethan almost passed out. He had to grab the driver's side door just to keep from hitting the filthy floor. "You did what?" he whispered, his eyes popping out of his skull. "You brought him here? He is going to kill us both. You are crazy, you crazy old woman." "Show some respect to your grandmother," Roger chimed in, taking a step forward with a heavy wrench in his hand. His usually friendly face was now a mask of solid stone. "Let it go, Roger." I raised my hand. Fear makes him stupid. Right at that exact moment, the sound of a powerful engine roared outside the shop. Tires screeched on the gravel. We heard car doors slamming. Ethan turned as white as a sheet of paper. He started looking for a place to hide, glancing underneath the workbenches. "Stand perfectly still," I ordered him. "If you run, you look guilty. If you stay, you look like a man, even if you are just faking it." The pedestrian gate swung open. 3 men walked in. 2 were massive gorillas in cheap suits that were way too small for them. The man in the middle was different. He was about 50 years old, bald, with a scar slicing through his eyebrow and a stare made of pure ice. He was the Russian, or at least the man they called that. I knew him by a different name. Ethan was shaking so violently that his teeth were actually chattering. The men walked forward until they were 15 feet away from us. The Russian looked at Ethan with a predatory smile. Then he looked at the dismantled SUV and let out a dry laugh. "Well, well, little prince. They told me you were having some cash flow issues, but I did not think you were selling your carriage off for parts." Ethan could not speak. The Russian took another step. "Time is up, Ethan. $20,000. Right now. Or my boys are going to play baseball with your kneecaps. And after that, we will take a little trip to visit your mom's beautiful house." Ethan closed his eyes, bracing for the impact. That was when I stepped forward, placing myself directly between my grandson and the thugs. "Good afternoon, Vladimir," I said, using my clearest, firmest voice. The Russian stopped dead in his tracks. He looked down at me, furrowing his brow. He looked me up and down, my orthopedic shoes, my floral dress, my gray hair tied up in a neat bun. "And who is this?" he asked mockingly, glancing at his muscle. "Is your sweet little granny going to protect you? Step aside, ma'am. This is not a bake sale." "I greeted you by your name, Vladimir Kogan," I said, maintaining steady eye contact. "Have the basic decency to greet me back. I am Alice Miller." The name seemed to strike something deep in his memory. He blinked. The mocking smile slowly faded away. "Miller?" He narrowed his eyes. "From Miller Transport?" "The very same. The woman who used to rent you refrigerated trucks 25 years ago, back when you were just a punk kid moving boxes of seafood up from the coast." The silence that fell over the auto shop was absolute. Roger gripped his wrench tighter. Ethan opened his eyes, looking back and forth from me to the Russian without understanding a single thing. The Russian looked at me with a mix of utter disbelief and a very reluctant respect. "Mrs. Alice," he muttered, "I thought you had died or moved down to Florida." "I retired. I did not die, and I certainly did not move to Florida. I am still right here, protecting what belongs to me." The Russian ran a hand over his bald head, letting out a heavy sigh that was almost a nervous laugh. "Well, look at that. It is a small world. So the little prince here is your grandson." "Unfortunately," I replied without even looking at Ethan, "we do not get to pick our blood, Vladimir, but we do get to pick our debts." The Russian regained his boss posture. He crossed his arms. "Well, ma'am, I have a lot of respect for your history. You were a tough nail in business, I remember. But business is business. Your grandson owes me money, a lot of money, and I do not give out discounts just for nostalgia's sake." "I am not here to ask for a discount," I said, pulling a thick manila envelope out of my purse. "I am here to settle a debt, but on my terms." The Russian raised an eyebrow. "Your terms?" "Ethan owes you $20,000. $5,000 is what you originally loaned him. $15,000 is your predatory interest from the last 3 months. Those are the rules of the street, ma'am. The rules of the street also dictate that you respect your elders and the people who opened the door for you in the first place." I took one step closer, standing face to face with him. Despite my height, I felt like I was looking him dead in the eye. "There is $7,000 in cash right here. It is my life savings from the last 5 years. $5,000 for the principal loan, and $2,000 in profit for you. Take it, and the debt is completely settled." One of the guerrillas laughed out loud. "The old lady is crazy, boss. Let's just smash him." The Russian raised a single hand and silenced the man instantly. He stared at me intently, calculating. $7,000 is way too low, Mrs. Alice. You are insulting me." "No, Vladimir, I am offering you an elegant way out. Because if you do not accept this, I am going to have to make a phone call." "To the cops?" he scoffed. "Half the precinct is on my payroll." "No, not to the cops. To the truckers' union, to Mr. George. Do you remember George? He still sends me fruit baskets every Christmas. And it just so happens that the warehouse where you store all your imported merchandise," I pointed toward the east, "sits right on land controlled by the union. It would be a real shame if tomorrow they decided to do an impromptu inventory audit, or if they blocked your loading docks with 118-wheelers for a spontaneous strike." The Russian's face shifted. All the color drained from his cheeks. He knew I was not bluffing. He knew my influence in the old transportation world, that invisible web that actually runs the city, was still very much alive. He was a modern gangster, but he relied heavily on logistics, and I was once the absolute queen of logistics. "You are the devil, ma'am," Vladimir said, but there was deep admiration in his voice. "I am just a grandmother who wants to drink her tea in peace. Do we have a deal?" I held out the envelope. The Russian stared at it for a long second. Then he let out a loud, booming laugh. Deal, he snatched the envelope. To the old school. But I am warning you, ma'am, if your grandson ever steps foot inside my casino again, I will kill him. Kill. And if that happens, not even George will be able to save him. If he ever sets foot in there again, I will hand you the gun myself, I assured him. The Russian thumbed through the cash quickly. He nodded. A real pleasure, Mrs. Alice. A nice SUV, or at least what is left of it. He signaled to his men and they turned around. They walked out of the shop, got into their car, and drove off, taking the death threat with them as if it were nothing but a passing cloud. Once the engine faded into the distance, my legs, which had been as solid as steel columns, finally began to shake. I had to lean hard against the workbench. Roger ran over and grabbed me a chair. "Sit down, boss lady." "Incredible, just incredible." Roger was laughing nervously. I thought we were dead meat for sure. I sat down, taking a deep breath. Ethan was still glued to the side of the SUV, staring at the exact spot where the Russian had been standing. He was in pure shock. Slowly, he turned his head to look at me. He looked at me as if he had never actually seen me before in his life. As if the woman who made him sandwiches and the woman who had just brought a mobster to his knees were two completely different people. "Grandma?" His voice was barely a whisper. You knew him. I have lived for 73 years, Ethan," I said, finally catching my breath. "Did you really think I spent my entire life just knitting baby clothes? I built an empire surrounded by men who spit on the floor and carried switchblades in their pockets. Vladimir Kogan was just an errand boy back when I was signing million-dollar contracts." Ethan slid down until he was sitting on the floor, right in the grease and the dirt. He put his hands on his head. "You paid $7,000. That was your life savings." "Yes, the money I was saving up for my cataract surgery and to fix the roof on the house. It is gone. Because of you." Ethan started to cry, but this time it was totally different. It was not fear, it was shame. A deep, agonizing, real shame. He finally realized the magnitude of my sacrifice and his own utter insignificance. "I am trash. I am trash. I called you useless. I screamed at you, and you just saved my life." I stood up with great effort. I walked over to him and used the tip of my cane to lift his chin up so he had to look me in the eyes. "Yes, you acted like trash. And yes, you are completely useless right now, but that ends today." "What? What are you going to do?" I pointed at the stripped-down SUV. "Do you see that? That is exactly what you are right now. Dismantled, no wheels, no power, but Roger is going to teach you." "What?" "Starting tomorrow, you are going to be here every single day at 6 in the morning. You are going to learn how to put that SUV back together, piece by piece. You are going to get your hands dirty with real grease, not with designer hair gel. You are going to work for Roger until you pay me back every single penny of those $7,000, plus interest." "But what about college?" "College can wait a semester. The lessons of real life cannot. You are going to learn exactly how hard it is to earn a single dollar. You are going to learn how an engine works and how the world actually works. And if you miss a single day, if you are late by even 1 minute, I will call the Russian myself and tell him the deal is off." Roger smiled and crossed his arms. "Welcome to the crew, little prince. Tomorrow, I want you here early to sweep the floors before you even think about touching a single tool." Ethan looked at Roger. Then he looked at the wrecked SUV, and finally he looked back at me. There was no defiance left in his eyes. There was fear, yes, but there was also a tiny spark of relief. Someone had finally taken the wheel that he had never known how to control. "Yes, Grandma," he said, lowering his head. "Do not call me Grandma right now," I corrected him, turning around to leave. "In this shop, I am the owner of that vehicle, and in my home, I am the owner of everything. Now get up, go wash your face, and let's go. I need to get back in time to watch my soap opera, and you need to explain to your mother exactly why we are $7,000 poorer." We walked out of the garage and into the afternoon sun. The air felt much lighter. Ethan walked 2 steps behind me in silence, opening the taxi door for me when it arrived. As we headed home, I ran my fingers over my husband's watch. I could feel its heavy weight on my wrist. The storm had finally passed, but the entire landscape had changed forever. Ethan had lost his favorite toy and all his arrogance, but I had reclaimed something I thought I lost a long time ago, my crown. And even though my hands shook a little bit from age, the grip I had on the reins of my family had never been firmer. Useless, I thought, smiling to myself as I watched the city blur past the window. We will see exactly who is useless by the time I am done with you, boy. The cab turned the corner onto my street. The house looked perfectly calm, but I knew that inside, the real reconstruction was just about to begin. Not of the SUV, but of the man Ethan would have to become if he wanted to survive his grandmother. 6 months have passed since my silver SUV ended up on cinder blocks in Roger's garage, and the house no longer smells like Ethan's expensive cologne or the sandalwood incense Betty used to burn to cleanse the bad energy. Now the house smells like strong black coffee at 5 in the morning, and that specific scent of heavy-duty degreaser soap my grandson uses to scrub the motor oil out of his fingernails. It is 6 in the morning on a Tuesday. I'm sitting in the kitchen, in my flannel bathrobe, watching Ethan cook up some scrambled eggs. There is no more yelling, no more rushing off to parties, no more demanding cash. "Good morning, Grandma," he says without turning around, hyper-focused on making sure the yolk does not break. His voice has changed. It is deeper, less whiny. "Good morning, honey. Do you have a lot of work today?" Roger says we are finishing up the transmission on Mr. George's truck today. "It is going to be a heavy shift," he answers, sliding his breakfast onto a chipped plate. I look at his hands. They are no longer the soft hands of a pianist who has never actually touched a key. He has thick calluses on his palms, tiny cuts healing over his knuckles, and that permanent black stain deep in his cuticles that not even the toughest wire brush can scrub away. They are a man's hands, hands that build things, not hands that beg for things. Betty walks into the kitchen, already dressed in a simple tailored suit. Ever since I completely cut off her cash flow and explained that my life savings went toward keeping her son breathing, she had to go out and get a job. She is a receptionist at a dental clinic now. At first, she cried, she threw tantrums, and she called me a tyrant. Now she looks tired, sure, but she walks with her back perfectly straight. "I am heading out, Mom. I left your lunch prepped in the fridge," she tells me, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. "Ethan, want me to drop you off at the shop? It is on my way." "No, Mom. I'm going to take the bus. It gives me time to read the mechanic's manual the old man lent me." They leave. The house falls silent, but it is no longer an empty, hollow silence. It is a silence of total peace, of restored order. I stand up, wash my coffee mug, and get ready. Today is inspection day. I take a cab down to the industrial district. The driver glances at me in the rearview mirror, probably wondering what on earth an old lady in orthopedic shoes is doing heading down to the auto repair shops. If only he knew that I am going to check on my greatest investment. Maybe he would understand my smile. I arrive at the Golden Piston. The loud rattle of impact wrenches and the hiss of compressed air hoses sounds like sweet music to my ears. Roger is shouting instructions at a new apprentice, but he stops dead when he sees me walk in. "Boss lady!" He wipes his hands on a filthy rag and walks over to greet me. "Right on time. Come take a look at this." We walk to the back, to the exact same spot where half a year ago my grandson cried looking at his dismantled toy. The SUV is no longer sitting on cinder blocks. It has all 4 wheels bolted on, shiny and brand new. The engine roars with a smooth, even hum, like the purr of a giant metal cat. Ethan is leaning deep into the open hood, tightening a hose with absolute laser focus. He is wearing his blue coveralls with his name embroidered right on the chest, stained with honest, hard-earned grease. "Hey, kid!" Roger shouts. "The auditor is here." Ethan lifts his head. He has a smudge of black grease on his cheek. He smiles at me. It is not that arrogant smirk from before, or the fake smile he used when he wanted cash. It is an exhausted, genuinely proud smile. "Hey, Grandma, what do you think?" "It sounds great, Ethan, but sounding great is not enough. Does it drive?" "Better than the day it rolled off the dealership lot," he assures me, gently closing the hood. I cleaned out the fuel injectors, swapped out the water pump that was starting to fail, and tuned up the suspension. Roger supervised the whole thing. Roger nods, arms crossed, with a sense of paternal pride I never thought I would see, directed at my grandson. "The kid has real talent, Mrs. Alice. At first he was more useless than an ashtray on a motorcycle, with all due respect, but he learns fast, and he does not complain." Ethan wipes the sweat off his forehead with his forearm. "I have something for you," he tells me, reaching into the pocket of his coveralls. He pulls out a white envelope slightly crumpled and stained with oil on one corner. He hands it over. I take it. Inside, there are $300 in mixed bills. "This is my payment for the week," he says with total seriousness. "I have already paid back $1,200. I still owe you $5,800 to cover what you gave the Russian." "And after that?" "After that, I will start paying you the interest." I look at the money. To the businesswoman Alice, this is pocket change. But to Grandma Alice, these worn bills are worth more than all the gold in Quick Cash Pawn. They represent hours of lying flat on his back underneath a heavy chassis, hours of enduring the blistering heat and the freezing cold, hours of bending his spine and sweating. All right, I tuck the envelope into my purse, making a mental note to write it in the ledger. "But you still have a long way to go." "I know, I am in no rush." "Good, because today I need you to do a haul for me." Ethan looks at me, totally confused. "A haul? But the SUV is yours, Grandma. I do not have permission to take it out." I pull the keys out of my purse, the exact same keys I recovered that early morning. I toss them to him. He catches them in mid-air on pure reflex. "Wash your hands and change your clothes. We are going to the grocery store. I am all out of peaches." The drive to the grocery store was entirely different this time around. There was no blaring music. There was no aggressive acceleration. Ethan drove with both hands firmly gripped on the steering wheel, respecting every single traffic light, caring for the machine that he had rebuilt piece by piece with his own hands. He knew exactly what every bolt, every gallon of gas actually cost. "It feels good, does it not?" I asked while we waited at a red light. "It feels different," he admitted. "Before, I used to just hop in and stomp on the gas. Now I can actually feel how the gears shift. I can hear if a belt is squealing. It is almost like the car talks to me." "Things always speak to the people who actually know how to listen to them, honey, just like people do." We pulled into the parking lot. Ethan did not look for the handicap spot. He parked all the way in the back, where there was shade, walking the extra distance to the entrance without a single complaint. He grabbed a shopping cart, checked to make sure the wheels were spinning right, and waited for me to set the pace. We walked into aisle 4. The air conditioning hit me, just like that terrible day, but this time I did not feel cold. I felt the warm glow of absolute victory. People walked right past us. Nobody stared. We were just an old lady and her grandson doing the weekly grocery shopping. But to me, we were two warriors returning to the battlefield. We got to the canned goods section. There they were, the peaches in syrup sitting on the highest shelf, mocking my short stature and my old, tired bones. I stopped right in front of the shelf. Ethan stopped right next to me. I did not say a word. I did not have to. Ethan looked up at the can on the top shelf. Then he looked down at me. There were no earbuds in his ears. There was no phone glued to his hand. Without me even having to ask, he reached his arm up. His coveralls tightened across his broad shoulders. His fingers, now strong and stained with honest, hard work, gripped the can firmly. He brought it down and held it right in front of my eyes for a second. "This is the brand you like, right?" he asked softly. "The one that is not too sweet." "That is the one, honey." He placed the can inside the cart with a gentleness that heavily contrasted his new physical strength. Then he turned to face me and placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Do you need anything else from the top shelf, Grandma? I have plenty of time. I do not have anything more important to do." I felt a tight knot form in my throat, but I swallowed it down. The women of my bloodline do not cry in the canned goods aisle, even if our hearts are overflowing. "Just the milk and the bread, Ethan. Let's go." We finished our shopping. At the checkout line, he pulled out his own wallet and paid for the peaches. "My treat," he said. As we walked toward the exit, I saw out of the corner of my eye the exact same cashier who had checked us out on that awful day. She looked at us, recognized Ethan, and I saw her physically tense up, bracing herself for the screaming, the tantrum. But Ethan was just pushing the cart, calmly chatting with me about how a carburetor functions. The cashier smiled, a little confused but deeply relieved. We loaded the bags into the SUV. Ethan opened the passenger door for me and waited patiently for me to get my legs settled before gently closing it. On the way back home, we drove right past the building where the Russian operated. Ethan tensed up slightly when he saw the place, but he did not look away. "I am not afraid of him anymore, Grandma," he said out of nowhere. "Fear is a good thing, Ethan. It keeps you alert and sharp. What you should never have is debt." "No, I finally understood what you did. That day at the auto shop when you stood right in front of him. You were not scared because you knew exactly what you were worth. I was terrified because I knew that I was worth absolutely nothing. My only value was my friend's stuff, your jewelry, this SUV, but inside I was completely empty." I took my glasses off to wipe them with the edge of my sweater. "Nobody is born full, honey. You fill yourself up with what you do. You were filling yourself up with garbage. Now you are filling yourself up with a real trade." We arrived at the house. Betty was waiting for us at the door. She looked worried, as usual, until she saw Ethan step out carrying the heavy grocery bags in one hand while using his other hand to help me out of the vehicle. "Mom, Ethan, is everything okay?" she asked. "Everything is absolutely perfect, sweetie," I replied, walking into my home, which felt more like mine than it ever had before. "Your son treated me to the peaches." That night, after a dinner of hearty stew, which this time Ethan ate with genuine pleasure and even washed the dishes afterward, I sat down in my armchair to knit. Ethan sat at the dining room table, but he did not pull out his cell phone. He pulled out his mechanic's manual and a notebook. He was actually studying. Truly, I looked down at my wrinkled hands. They had carried heavy boxes. They had signed massive checks. They had raised children. And now, at the very end of the road, they had managed to straighten out a tree that was growing completely crooked. Many people think that at 73 years old, a woman is only good for getting in the way, for acting like an old piece of furniture shoved into the corner of the living room. They think that just because we walk slow, we think slow. They think we are useless, poor old fools. What they do not know is that old age is not weakness. It is accumulated strategy. They do not know that we have the patience of a spider and the memory of an elephant.